Section 5 of On Chronic Alcoholic Intoxication, with an inquiry into the influence of the abuse of alcohol as a predisposing cause of disease by William Marcet. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Affections of the nervous system resembling chronic alcoholic intoxication. There exist certain disorders of the functions of the nervous system owing to other causes than intemperance, and closely resembling chronic alcoholism. They are produced by long continued and excessive intellectual exertions, and by sudden and violent emotions. These affections exhibit symptoms which bear a close analogy to those of chronic alcoholism, and I have treated them successfully by the same means. I have preserved notes relating to several patients who suffered from disorders of the nervous system owing to excessive mental exertions, the principal symptoms being headache and giddiness, with much nervous uneasiness and sometimes hallucination, want of sleep, and occasional palpitations. In 1854 I attended Mrs. B., aged 24. For the last 3 months she had been greatly engaged with literary pursuits, and ascribed her illness to excessive reading and exertion of the mind. She suffers from headache, giddiness, and great nervous uneasiness. She cannot sleep at night, her appetite is indifferent, and she is subject now and then to palpitations. The following is a remarkable case which came under my notice, where the disturbance of the nervous system from excessive mental exertion and anxiety had reached such a pitch as to amount to actual mental alienation. C.T., age 41, as a gas rate collector, apparently in easy circumstances, of a very nervous temperament and excitable temper. He had always been a gas inspector, and subject to much anxiety connected with his business. There exists a slight tendency to suicide, but he observes that he never would or could destroy himself. He is accompanied by his wife, who considers all he says as the perfect truth. C.T. expresses himself fluently, and his memory appears very lucid, from the minute account he gives of his case. On September 13, 1855, he was engaged the whole day in writing, and appeared much excited. He went to bed at 11 o'clock, and the next morning rose at 3. At 9 a.m. he proceeded to his business, leaving his papers in great disorder, which he had never done before. He returned home at 5 p.m. and asked for some tea. Having shortly afterwards kissed his children, his wife was then absent, he left home, though for no definite purpose, taking a few pounds with him. He wandered about all night, and found himself in the morning at Hampton Court. He continued walking, not knowing where he was going, or why he had left his house, and after some days arrived at Southampton. He next embarked on a packet leaving for France, and resumed his rambles in Normandy, where he suffered great privations, sleeping in the fields and on the high road, and living upon nothing but turnips, apples, and water. Having remained abroad for about 1 month, at the commencement of November he returned to Plymouth, stopping on his way at Jersey, and then wandered to Teignmouth, Totnes, Exeter, and from thence to Bristol and Clifton. He still had some money with him, although he thought he had none and that he wanted none, with the view of joining his family on the birthday of one of his children. This unfortunate man returned home, and arrived late at night at his own door. The person who opened it unluckily did not recognize him and closed the door upon him. He then set off again on his rambling life, and walked to Brighton, with the object of visiting some relations who he knew would be kind to him. But when at Brighton he never called upon them, although he passed under their very windows. He does not know why he did not see them. From Brighton he went to Shoreham, to Worthing, and to Preston, where his money being entirely spent, and having no food, he began to suffer the most bitter pangs of hunger. He used his utmost endeavours to obtain food from charitable institutions, and was directed to Arundel, whence, finding no relief, he proceeded to Chichester. In this town his sufferings from hunger were such that he was induced to produce food by dishonest means. He was taken up and imprisoned, with hard labour, for 12 days. When liberated he immediately started for London, where he walked in 2 days, the distance being 64 miles. During the journey he took nothing but bread and water. He proceeded immediately to his house, and arrived there on the 27th November, having been absent from home more than 2 months. It was not until this patient had been thoroughly cross-questioned that I could believe the foregoing account. In order to obtain a corroborative evidence, I examined his naked feet, and found the soles hardened, resembling tough leather, and showing that he certainly walked a considerable distance. This patient called on me in April 1861. He was quite well and engaged in an active and responsible situation. His health had been perfectly sound since he had left off my treatment, which he gratefully acknowledged. Sudden grief may produce symptoms identical with those of chronic alcoholism. Indeed, in the following case I was with some difficulty convinced that the patient was not addicted to the habit of excessive drinking. R.M., a coal porter, admitted as an outpatient on March 10th, 1859, is of regular habits, and has never been addicted to drinking, has not been more than twice in his life the worse for liquor. Lost his wife 8 months ago, at which he was greatly distressed, and since then suffered from the frequent occurrence of giddiness, headache, and black specks before his eyes. He trembles a great deal, especially in the morning, cannot sleep well at night, but his sleep is not disturbed by nightmare. Is very weak, yet has not given up work. Has smoked a great deal after the death of his wife, for the purpose, he says, of driving care away. He now perceives that smoking makes him very giddy, and he is gradually giving up the habit. There are other diseases exhibiting the symptoms in common with chronic alcoholism, such as chorea, hysteria, the sequel of an attack of apoplexy, and tremors from poisoning with lead or mercury, but it would be inconsistent with our subject to enter upon any observations on these affections. Prognosis. As may be anticipated, the successful treatment of chronic alcoholism depends, first of all, on the habit of drinking to excess being given up. As soon as this result is obtained, or if the patient applies for relief, after having, of his own accord, ceased drinking, a favorable issue of the disease is to be expected. In those instances where the complaint is attended with other disorders, and if the patient be not in reduced circumstances, the treatment is very successful, the sufferer being cured of every symptom. The weakness of the limbs, so prevalent in the disease, is sometimes, however, troublesome to overcome entirely. But in cases where the disorder of the nervous system, consequent on intemperance, is accompanied by another disease, the treatment may have to be continued for some length of time, and will sometimes leave the patient still laboring under the secondary affection. A remarkable instance of this kind, which has already been alluded to, was that of an individual subject to gout, and who was seized with chronic alcoholism at every successive return of the gouty attacks. He was treated for chronic alcoholism, and gradually the symptoms of the morbid condition of the nervous system disappeared, although the attacks of gout returned. Disease of the liver appeared in one instance to keep up chronic alcoholism, although in the course of the treatment a marked improvement of the nervous symptoms was obtained. Inflammation of the lungs also increases the difficulty of arresting and curing the disease. The same observation applies to disorders of the digestive organs and rheumatic affections. It must be also understood that an improvement in the secondary disease is usually attended with the relief of chronic alcoholism. End of section 5. Section 6 of On Chronic Alcoholic Intoxication, with an inquiry into the influence of the abuse of alcohol as a predisposing cause of disease, by William Marcet. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Treatment of chronic alcoholic intoxication. The treatment of a chronic disease is usually attended with much difficulty, and a long period will generally be required to effect a complete cure when such an end is attainable. I have succeeded, however, by a simple method, and within a comparatively limited period, in restoring health in cases of chronic alcoholism of the severest description. The treatment is to be considered under two heads. The patient must first be induced to give up the habit of drinking, unless he has done so previously, and, the inordinate desire for alcoholic stimulants having been subdued, the next point is to arrest the disease. It is usually considered that the habitual use of spirituous liquors becomes so inveterate as to defy all control. In the following case, related by Macnish, bears upon the subject. A gentleman accustomed to drink to excess answered to the exhortations of a friend, "If a bottle of brandy stood at one hand, and the pit of hell yawned at the other, and if I were convinced I should be pushed in, as surely as I took one glass, I could not refrain." I have observed, however, that when health is evidently giving way from overindulgence in spirituous beverages, drinking is often given up spontaneously, or, at all events, considerably diminished. By consulting the analytic table, the reader may notice that in the case of W.H., case 7, J.T., case 13, E.C., case 15, L.M., case 17, G.R., case 18, C.P., case 21, J.H., case 30, and others, the allowance of spirituous beverages had been spontaneously diminished, or altogether stopped, long before applying for medical advice. In these instances, the patients stated that they had given up excessive drinking because they considered their health was suffering from it. when the habit of drinking has become inveterate, I have invariably found it of great importance to begin by obtaining the full confidence of the patient. Dr. Trotter, describing the means of checking this pernicious habit, observes, when the physician has once gained the full confidence of his patient, he will find little difficulty in beginning his plan of cure. This confidence may sometimes be employed to great advantage when your regime is in danger of being transgressed, for frequent relapses and promises repeatedly broken, in such situations, render the physician's visit a work of great trial to his patients. This disease, I mean the habit of drunkenness, is like any other mental derangement. There is an ascendancy to be gained over the person committed to our care, which, when accomplished, brings him entirely under our control. It will be necessary to begin by impressing upon the patient's mind that he is really suffering from the habit of drinking too much, and that it is of no use to commence a medical treatment unless he be decided to abstain from spirituous stimulants, or at all events diminish considerably his usual allowance. If he appear ready to act according to this advice, it will be desirable to inquire into the cause of the abuse, and remove it if possible. Should an individual drink from habits of indolence, let him exercise his mind and body. If another drinks to drown dull care, let him have amusements. If intemperance results from frequenting bad company, let such acquaintances be dropped. If spirituous liquors taken as a preservative against cold, let the clothing be increased, and a more nutritious solid diet taken. But, as Roche observes, the inordinate desire, passion, for drink becomes itself a cause of drunkenness. For when the body has accustomed itself to spirituous liquors, it can no longer do without them. In such cases little can be derived from an attempt to stop the cause of intemperance, and other means must be adopted. Macnish relates the case of an individual in Maryland, much addicted to drinking, who heard one evening a noise in his kitchen, and, on opening the door to ascertain its cause, found his servants laughing at the exhibition of a young negro, who was engaged in mimicking his master under the effects of liquor. This comic scene produced such an impression on him that he was never known to be drunk again. Dr. Pitcairn is reported to have cured a Highland chieftain by obtaining from him a promise that he would drop a little sealing wax every day into his whiskey glass, when, after a time, the sealing wax having filled the glass, he could drink no more. A gentleman, to wean himself from drinking, used to add a glass of water to his bottle for every glass of Hollands he took out, till at last the drink got so insipid that he could no longer go on with it. An American physician, Dr. Cairns, taking advantage of the nauseating properties of tartar emetic, has advised this drug to be mixed with the patient's drink, but this process is condemned by Roche, who observes that the trick will soon be found out, and drink procured that has not been previously medicated. Tartar emetic has, besides, the disadvantage of acting injuriously on the patient's health. There is in every class of society a number of persons who, although they do not become intoxicated, suffer from chronic alcoholism, from drinking more spirits, wine, or beer than agrees with their health. Most of these persons lead a useful and active life, and apply for medical advice, being quite unaware of the cause of their illness. Many in the upper ranks of society are thus seized with symptoms of chronic alcoholism. The habit of indulging freely in wine at frequent dinner parties, of drinking wine at lunch, of taking occasionally a glass of wine between meals, or of sipping every evening 2 or 3 glasses of sherry and water, or brandy and water. The usual good living at the officers' mess or at the clubs, the custom which exists for commercial travelers, not only of using freely stimulants at dinner, but also of offering wine to their customers when transacting business, and finding, of course, an equal pleasure in these potations. All these various circumstances, and many others besides, are quite sufficient to bring on an attack of chronic alcoholism when an individual is predisposed to the disease. Drinking is not usually in the cases an indomitable habit, and accordingly the patient will gladly give it up if he feels certain that by doing so his health can be improved. A general opinion is very prevalent that an individual whose health suffers from the habit of drinking to excess may invariably cure himself by taking to sober his habits, or giving up drink entirely, and it is with this end in view that many are induced to join temperance societies. I beg to state, however, that this idea is fallacious, which is shown not only by Dr. Carpenter's opinion on the subject, which I have already reported, page 33, but also by my having brought forward a certain number of instances where patients applied to me for advice subsequently to their having partly or entirely given up the habit of hard drinking. It is consequently necessary in many cases, after putting an end to the habit of drinking to excess, to adopt an active medical treatment. The nature of the diet to be recommended will vary according to circumstances. In general, those suffering from chronic alcoholism have little or no appetite. The first step in such cases is to begin by relieving this symptom, and then recommending a nutritious and easily digestible food such as broth, sweetbread, carefully roasted meat, provided it be lean, on account of the secretion of bile and pancreatic juice being probably much below their usual standard. Strict attention must be paid to this part of the treatment, as an insufficient and unhealthy kind of food undoubtedly predisposes the body to suffer from the morbid effects of the long-continued habit of indulging to excess in spirituous beverages, and on the contrary, a healthy nutritious diet is well known to be beneficial. With respect to the use of the alcoholic stimulants, if the patient has completely given them up for some time, and entirely lost his taste for liquor, I have been in the habit of recommending about a pint of beer daily to be taken at meals, but in so doing much care is required, as some patients, who formerly could drink hard without being the worse for it, become liable to be easily affected by alcoholic beverages, even of the mildest description. The reader need hardly be reminded that tea and coffee are excellent substitutes for alcoholic drinks, which they resemble, not only by their stimulating powers, but also the remarkable property of diminishing the waste of the body. See the appendix. Thus affecting an indirect process of nutrition. In certain countries such as Norway, where many district alcoholic drinks are seldom to be attained, I have observed coffee and milk to be extensively used, both as food and in the place of beer and spirits. But although tea or coffee may be resorted to as beverages, they cannot be introduced at dinner instead of beer or wine. Many do not like soda water. Toast and water is unpalatable. Such beverages as lemonade are unpleasant when taken with solid food, and no choice therefore seems to remain but to drink pure water, which, although insipid at first when taken by those who are in the habit of drinking beer and wine, soon becomes agreeable and refreshing, especially if ice cold. We shall now proceed to inquire into the therapeutical treatment of the morbid condition of the body described in the preceding pages. Chronic alcoholism is not to be cured, like delirium tremens, in the course of a few days, for although under an appropriate treatment, a marked improvement may in most cases occur after a short time, a much longer period will be required to restore the patient to perfect health. Magnus Huss has derived very satisfactory results from the treatment of chronic alcoholism with fusel oil, fusilol or fermentilium solanani, given in the form of pill with althea root. The prescription used by Dr. Huss is as follows: R. fermentole solanani, radix althei pulverate, and miscellaneous surrupti althei. 2 pills are to be taken 6 times daily. And has observed this medicine to diminish considerably the trembling, uneasiness, formications, and feeling of weakness. He has found opium useful, especially when given with the view of checking the formications. Formication, a peculiar sensation, as if the skin was being pricked with needles. Twitching of the muscles, cramps, and convulsions. But he has not noticed this drug to relieve the patient from the nightly hallucinations, and considers it as contraindicated in cases attended with delirium during the daytime. He alludes to camphor as having the property of allaying the nervous uneasiness, tendency to delirium, and the occurrence of hallucinations while endeavoring to fall asleep. He also recommends camphor as a means of checking the giddiness and faintness. It is to be given in doses of from 1 to 5 grains. He has obtained good results from the use of arnica, Flores arnicae, when having been cured of the trembling and formication. The patient still complained of a feeling of weakness, accompanied with dullness of the mental faculties, noises in the ears, and the appearance of flying specks when in an erect position. He has recourse to medicines containing iron, when others fail in their action. Finally, Huss often makes use of spirituous fluids, prescribing a glass of brandy to be taken twice daily, or a daily allowance of 2 glasses of port, or as much sherry, or 3 or 4 tablespoons, as lawful, of tinct absinthe or tinct cinchinae. He prescribes sometimes 40 or 60 drops of spirituous etheris sulphurici, ether spirituosus, to be taken twice or 3 times a day, or a half bottle of porter to be drunk in the forenoon. I have tried the effects of opium carbonate of ammonia, preparations of iron, bitters, and other medicines which were attended with more or less benefit. And in cases where the digestion was disordered, opium has been administered with very good results, besides my finding it very useful in bringing on sleep in 1 or 2 cases where oxide of zinc had failed to produce this result. I have not often observed bitters and iron to be beneficial at the outset of the disease, but the patient being in a fair way of recovery, steel and quinine have proved a great service. In some cases, attended with headache, considerable relief was obtained from the application of a small blister to the back of the neck. If, however, chronic alcoholism be considered as depending on a peculiar disease condition of a certain part of the body, owing to the action of a poison, no remedy can be looked upon as decidedly efficacious unless it exerts its power, not directly on the symptoms themselves, which are but the signs of the illness, but on the principle of the disorder. Bearing this in mind, I have endeavored to discover a treatment which, by acting immediately on the nervous system, should remove its diseased condition, the result of the long-continued abuse of alcoholic stimulants, thereby acting as a means of arresting the symptoms of the illness. I am consequently not about to recommend one remedy for a certain symptom, and another remedy for another symptom, but shall endeavor to show that there exists a substance possessed of powerful and definite medicinal properties, and having the remarkable property of restoring to health, or at all events, of greatly relieving the disordered nervous system of a person suffering from chronic alcoholism. The medicinal agent in question, acting efficaciously in cases where the principal symptom may be either sleeplessness, or hallucinations, or trembling, or any other, and this substance is oxide of zinc. I shall first proceed to give an account of the action of oxide of zinc on the human body in health and in disease, and then show how powerful an agent it is for the cure of the particular complaint of which we are treating. Physiological properties of oxide of zinc. This subject has been ably investigated by Dr. Michaelides of Tübingen, Dr. Bouchut de la Roche, Dr. Herpin of Geneva, and others. Oxide of zinc, although very sparingly, if at all, soluble in water, is readily dissolved in the acid secretion of the stomach. Considering it of great importance to ascertain how far gastric juice dissolved oxide of zinc, I have undertaken inquiry on this subject, into the particulars of which I shall not, however, enter on the present occasion. The result obtained was, that gastric juice mixed with burnt or anhydrous oxide of zinc, its usual form when employed medicinally, and exposed at the temperature of the body, was nearly neutralized in the course of an hour. The conclusions from 2 of these experiments may be expressed as follows. Gastric juice, first experiment 100 parts, second experiment 100. Oxide of zinc dissolved, first experiment 0.143 parts, second experiment 0.117. Oxide of zinc which might have been dissolved, first experiment 0.169 parts, second experiment 0.123. Consequently, such doses as from 2 to 10 grains of oxide of zinc are readily soluble in the gastric juice secreted after one meal. According to the experiments of Michaelides, the metal finds its way into the blood, bile, and urine. 4 hours after the injection of a salt of zinc into the crural vein, the bile exhibited evident traces of zinc. It appeared in the bile previous to being eliminated from the body with the urine. The gentleman also observed, from experiments upon animals, that large doses of oxide of zinc produced erosions and ulcerations of the mucous membrane of the stomach, and that it may induce within the organs of respiration granulations analogous to miliary tubercles. Moreover, he believes that long-continued use of moderate doses of oxide of zinc interferes with digestion, producing anemia and marasmus. He found the blood of dogs taking oxide of zinc to contain 0.99, or nearly 1 per 1,000 of fibrin, instead of 1.92, the normal proportion. Dr. Bouchut, on repeating the experiments of Michaelides, succeeded, however, in giving a strong rabbit doses of from 5 to 10 grains of oxide of zinc without inconvenience to the animal. Footnote: Études sur la lactate de zinc dans epilepsie par le Dr. Herpin. End footnote. Dr. Herpin, after a long and careful series of observations on the effects of oxide of zinc upon the human body, has arrived at the following conclusion. Footnote: Du prognostic et du traitement curatif de l'épilepsie 1852, page 565, and footnote. That it is a perfectly harmless remedy, and may be given in doses of as much as 6 grams, or 90 grains, a day, for a very considerable time, without producing any other inconvenience than temporary uneasiness. That its physiological effects are confined to a mild action legere, on the intestines, consisting usually, in the case of adults, of nausea which may occasion vomiting, and in the case of children, of slight diarrhea. That the medicine is easily to be tolerated without discomfort, by beginning in the case of adults with 4.5 to 6 grains a day, and in the case of children with from 1 to 2.5 grains a day, these quantities being divided into 3 or 4 doses, and then giving every week from 2.5 to 3 grains more daily to adults, and from 1 to 2.5 grains more daily to children. That the form of pill is sometimes a means of enabling its being tolerated. Finally, that the uneasiness occurs less frequently when the medicine is taken an hour after a meal, that when fasting, and that the first dose in the morning is always that which is attended with the most discomfort. It appears that since Dr. Herpin wrote his valuable treatise on epilepsy, he has slightly modified his opinion respecting the first of his conclusions. For in a paper entitled Études sur la lactate des zinc dans epilepsie, published by him in 1855, he observes that after a long continued use of oxide of zinc, when it has been taken to the extent from 120 to 473 grams, or 1800 to 8000 grains, unfavorable symptoms may occur, young women being more especially subject to suffer in such cases from anemia and chlorosis. The symptoms, however, only acquiring some degree of importance when the treatment has been persevered in for 1 month after the first appearance of the unfavorable effects. I have confined myself in the researches on the action of zinc on the human body to the use of the metal under its form of oxide, because this substance, in order to be absorbed, must necessarily enter into combination with the acid secreted by the stomach, whether it be hydrochloric, lactic, or phosphoric acids. It is but reasonable to believe that under this form, zinc is more readily absorbed, and is more likely to exert a beneficial action than if administered under any other form. Since the publication of my first edition, I have also prescribed, somewhat largely, carbonate of zinc dissolved in water by an excess of carbonic acid. This fluid has every appearance of soda water. When containing about 1/4 of a grain of oxide of zinc to the ounce, it is nearly quite tasteless. Indeed, the solution would readily be taken for soda water by anybody not aware of its composition. A stronger solution merely leaves a slight metallic aftertaste, which is lessened by the effervescence due to the excess of carbonic acid. It is hardly possible to conceive that any of the metal can be absorbed in the state of bicarbonate. The salt is evidently decomposed in the stomach, and the metal passes into the circulation precisely under the same chemical form as if administered as oxide. Footnote: I have undertaken, in conjunction with Mr. F. Dupree, Ph.D., an inquiry into the solubility of oxide of zinc in water under the atmospheric pressure, and we have found that 1 ounce of the solution contained exactly 0.517 grains of oxide of zinc. End of footnote. I have obtained the following results as to the physiological action of oxide of zinc. 1. That after taking the substance in doses of from 2 grains and upwards in the case of adults, a feeling of nausea is sometimes perceived, but seldom to the extent of vomiting. This effect is diminished if, according to Dr. Herpin's practice, the medicine be given about an hour after a meal. 2. That after persevering with the treatment for some days, the medicine is in most cases tolerated, and the nausea and uneasiness produced at first diminish and even disappear. 3. That a slight giddiness, attended with the appearance of black specks before the eyes, and rumbling noises in the ears, may accompany the nausea occasioned by oxide of zinc. This is an indication of the doses being too high, and on diminishing them, these symptoms disappear. 4. A very important and remarkable effect of oxide of zinc is the power it frequently possesses of producing sleep. 5. I have not noticed the long continued use of oxide of zinc to produce evidently deleterious effects, even after it has been taken for a considerable length of time. The feeling of nausea and sickness occasioned by preparations of zinc appear to vary, to a certain extent, according to the form of the compound, for we are informed by Dr. Herpin that lactate of zinc is not so likely to be liable to this inconvenience as the oxide. The fact of oxide of zinc producing less uneasiness when taken after food is obviously owing to its state of dilution in a full stomach. Dr. Herpin has also observed that oxide of zinc is better tolerated when taken under the form of a pill, which may be accounted for by assuming that the substance is dissolved in the stomach, under that shape, less rapidly than under that of powder. It must be remembered, however, that oxide of zinc made up into pills may altogether escape absorption, and for that reason I prescribe it frequently as a powder. Some years ago, a female outpatient of the Westminster Hospital, who was taking pills of oxide of zinc and confection of roses, brought me a hard concretion she had removed from her motions. I found it, on examination, to be one of the pills taken, which had consequently escaped absorption. It is very questionable whether the whole of the medicine is absorbed, when given in large quantities, for it is remarkable to what extent the doses may be increased with impunity. I have frequently prescribed as much as 20 grains of this substance to be taken twice a day, and in 2 cases of epilepsy the dose was raised to 35 grains twice a day. With respect to the mechanism of its absorption, it is dissolved principally by the gastric juice and also by the free acid of the juice of the meat contained in the stomach, and this is an additional reason for giving this medicine shortly after meals, when the gastric juice is secreted in large quantity. The fats of the meat taken also very probably combine with it, especially the fatty acids derived from the neutral fats of the food. The conversion, more or less, fat into fatty acids being a phenomenon I have shown to take place invariably during digestion. Proceedings of the Royal Society, June 1858, and both McChevreul, Chevreul sur les Gracies, and MM. Genal and Monsal, a paper read to the Academic de Medicine, November 3, 1857, have observed that fats enter into combination with metallic oxides, forming a peculiar kind of soap. It is not a little remarkable that oxide of zinc should in some cases produce the very symptoms it is intended to cure, namely giddiness and faintness, and for this reason it should not be given indiscriminately. As a general rule, I have found it objectionable in chlorosis, and with females on a weak constitution. In some cases of hysteria I have also been obliged to withhold it, from its being decidedly objectionable. The following is a case in point. C.G., age 26, complains of headache and giddiness. Previous to her marriage 6 years ago, she had been subject to fainting fits, but since then the affection had not returned. She was treated with small doses of oxide of zinc, and about 5 minutes after taking the first dose, she felt very sick and fainted. After taking a second dose, she fainted a second time, remaining unconscious for 2 or 3 minutes on each occasion. Sometimes, though rarely, an apparent increase of the existing symptoms will occur in cases of chronic alcoholism treated with oxide of zinc, but on diminishing the dose, the unfavorable symptoms at once disappear. The property of oxide of zinc of frequently producing sleep, a power it appears to possess exclusive to all other metals, is very remarkable. I have observed this phenomena not only where oxide of zinc was given for the treatment of chronic alcoholic intoxication, but also when administered in other cases. A gentleman taking oxide of zinc for chorea complained of his feeling so drowsy after dinner that he was obliged to go to sleep every day at that time, greatly to his discomfort, as he boarded with the family and was much annoyed at this apparent breach of sociality. W.S., aged 11, treated with oxide of zinc for chorea, experienced great drowsiness every evening at 8:30, although he had never before felt sleepy at that hour. Another male patient, aged 52, taking oxide of zinc for the treatment of vertigo and headache, stated that since he had begun the powders he felt very sleepy, and could sleep all day long. W.J., age 75, case 5, taking oxide of zinc, is reported as sleeping from 1 till 3 o'clock p.m., although he never slumbered so long before in the daytime. E.B., case 6, became very sleepy in the daytime since taking the powders. W.H., case 7, treated with oxide of zinc, has observed that he feels very sleepy in the daytime. When sitting to read he falls asleep. He was never in the habit of sleeping in the day before taking the powders. J.W., case 11, states that the powders of zinc oxide make him feel drowsy. He falls asleep about 1 hour after taking them, and sleeps for an hour. Had not previously been accustomed to sleep during the daytime. This effect of oxide of zinc cannot possibly be owing to any narcotic property, such as that of opium or allied substances. It appears to me to be due to its power of allaying a morbid state of excitement of the nervous system, and consequently allowing the patient to sleep. Or in other words, oxide of zinc does not produce sleep by a direct process, but by removing the cause which prevents it. If this view be correct, it will follow that, when the administration of oxide of zinc in chronic alcoholism attended with a feeling of drowsiness and an improvement in the sleep, its effects are thereby shown to be highly beneficial, which is fully borne out by experience. The following case illustrates the difference between the action of opium and oxide of zinc. The patient had taken large doses of opium, according to this statement, for checking diarrhea, but also obviously for the purpose of mitigating the effects of alcohol in the nervous system. He succeeded more or less at first, but after a short time the drug lost its beneficial influence. Under these circumstances he experienced great relief from a treatment with oxide of zinc. S.W., aged 26, a hawker, called on me at the Westminster Hospital as an outpatient on the 15th November 1860. Complains of a dull pain in the left temple, shooting from the eye to the ear. Has been a very hard spirit drinker, which he kept up for the last 10 years, although he has drunk less for 2 or 3 months past, finding that hard drinking brings on invariably diarrhea. With the view of checking this effect, he had recourse to opium. At first he succeeded in checking the diarrhea, and he slept under the influence of the drug. But now it no longer stops the intestinal affection, neither does it exert its soporific powers. He has never been a sound sleeper since he first took to drinking. He suffers at present from great nervous uneasiness, and is subject to muscae volitantes, although not to hallucinations. Was ordered to take 2 grains of oxide of zinc twice a day, and I warned him of the importance of giving up completely the habit of drinking. This patient called again at the hospital on the 23rd of November, having derived great benefit from the medicine, although he did not act up on my advice as to leave off drinking. He stated that the powder's oxide of zinc had removed completely the uneasiness he had been subject to, and strengthened his nerves. In answer to my inquiries, he observed that he had on several occasions found much relief from the assuming temporary habits of sobriety, but never with the rapidity experienced on the present occasion. From the frequent necessity in cases of chronic alcoholism to continue giving oxide of zinc for a comparatively great length of time, it is important to make sure that this medicine cannot act as a slow poison, such as many other metals do, for instance, mercury and lead. Indeed, as previously observed, it would appear from Dr. Herpin's experience that unfavorable symptoms show themselves in certain cases from a protracted treatment with this metallic oxide. I have observed, however, that when the medicine acts unfavorably, as is sometimes the case with young and weak females, and especially those suffering from chlorosis, the patients are very quickly affected by the drug, offering consequently no opportunity of examining the result of a long-continued treatment. I have given oxide of zinc in a great number of cases for several months, without producing any dangerous or even evidently inconvenient symptoms. The following are instances of this kind. M.R., aged 24, admitted under my care as an outpatient of the Westminster Hospital, October 1855, is suffering from epilepsy. She began the treatment on the 27th of October with 6 grains of oxide of zinc twice a day. * I am in the habit of commencing the administration of oxide of zinc with no more than 1 or 2 grains for a dose. The dose being rapidly increased till the 15th of December, when she took no less than 35 grains of oxide of zinc twice a day. My notes of this date state, had a fit on the 13th, which was not severe. Looks pale and feels giddy. The symptoms are probably owing to the fit the patient had 2 days previously, and not to the zinc. The dose of 35 grains was perhaps rather large, but, as will subsequently be seen, if it produced paleness and giddiness, these symptoms were but transitory. On January 16th, the dose had been gradually reduced to 10 grains. By the 9th of February it had been again increased to 22 grains twice a day. On the 20th of February she was taking 15 grains twice a day, and she continued with that quantity till the 5th of April, having taken large doses of oxide of zinc for 4 months and a half. She had evidently benefited from the treatment, as on the 2nd of April the following note of her case occurs in my notebook. Continues to feel quite well, no return of the fits. In the next case the patient persisted in the treatment with oxide of zinc for a much longer period. H.J., aged 35, admitted as an outpatient on the 26th of May, 1855, and suffering from epilepsy. He began, on the day of his admission, with 1 grain of oxide of zinc twice a day, which was increased gradually to the 5th of December, when he took 35 grains twice a day. On the 12th of December, I recorded the following state of his case: feels quite well, no return of fits, showing at least that this enormous dose of oxide of zinc had produced no ill effect. He continued taking from 15 to 20 grains of the drug, with an interruption of a few days, when sulphate of zinc was tried, till the 5th of July, 1856, having been for nearly 14 months under the treatment of oxide of zinc, and, at all events, none for the worse for the medicine. Footnote: I remember having heard this patient complaining of a slight loss of memory, but it was not possible to ascertain whether this symptom depended on the epileptic fits or on the oxide of zinc. The following case is less remarkable, as the oxide of zinc was not taken for so long a period as in that of H.J. It is, however, well calculated to show that this medicinal agent does not act as a slow poison. R.M. admitted as an outpatient of the Westminster Hospital on January 16, 1856, suffering from incessant trembling of the right arm. This patient began with 1 grain of oxide of zinc twice a day, the dose being gradually increased till the 24th of February, when he was taking 14 grains of the oxide twice a day. On the 1st of March, 10 grains were prescribed for a dose, which he continued taking till the 14th. After this date, the dose was gradually raised to 20 grains. This he continued taking from the 19th of April to the 16th of May, having consequently been treated with large doses of oxide of zinc for 4 months. The trembling had much diminished under this treatment, and no new symptom had occurred. Consequently, the medicine had certainly not produced any injurious effects. Many more cases might be reported, if necessary, showing that the long-continued use of oxide of zinc as an internal remedy is attended with no evident evil results. End of Section 6. Section 7 of On Chronic Alcoholic Intoxication, with an inquiry into the influence of the abuse of alcohol as a predisposing cause of disease, by William Marcet. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Therapeutical properties of oxide of zinc. Oxide of zinc may be considered as a tonic for the nervous system, and at the same time a sedative and antispasmodic. The other compounds of zinc used in medicine appear to be possessed more or less of the same therapeutical properties as the oxide. Dr. Barnes has administered phosphate of zinc with favorable results in cases of epilepsy. The sulfate has been employed with advantage by Dr. Hughes, Dr. Addison, Dr. Barlow, and others for the treatment of chorea, and the lactate has been used in epilepsy by Dr. Herpin. Dr. Golding-Bird has been heard to state in the wards of Guy's Hospital that zinc has a peculiar and specific influence on the nervous system, in about the same manner as iron on blood. Footnote: Lancet, 1851, Volume 1, end footnote. It has been suggested, however, that this substance is possessed of medicinal power merely on account of the faith the patient places in its efficacy, meaning, in plain language, that it exerts no action whatever. As a proof of the effects of oxide of zinc not arising from its influence on the imagination, I may perhaps be allowed to report, in addition to Dr. Golding-Bird's valuable opinion, the case of a little dog treated successfully with this drug. On the 2nd November, 1855, a small spaniel, kept in my house, was suddenly seized with a peculiar and uninterrupted moaning. The animal was very restless during the night, and the next morning had a fit attended with violent screaming and barking, which lasted about 1 minute. It was followed by other similar attacks, which increased in frequency until there was hardly an intermission between them, the animal running round and round from left to right and crying out most piteously. The fits continued the whole of the succeeding night. On the 24th, the severity of the attacks had increased. There was partial paralysis of the posterior extremities, but towards the evening the paroxysms diminished in violence and frequency. On the 25th they were hardly perceptible, and on the following day the animal had resumed its lively character. I began the treatment in the present instance with opium. The dog was made to take 10 drops of laudanum 3 times during the first day, and then 20 drops at night, but without stopping the fits. I next made him inhale chloroform until he became perfectly insensible, which had no further effect than that of diminishing the fits at the time. On the 24th I gave him 4 grains of oxide of zinc in 2 doses. 1 grain had been given to him on the 22nd. The same on the 25th and 26th when the treatment was concluded. The case proves beyond doubt that oxide of zinc does not cure by acting on the imagination, but that it really is in itself a powerful remedy. Footnote: I have not found it stated in my notes at what time on the 24th the oxide of zinc was administered, but recollect distinctly giving the remedy as a last resource, thinking the dog was then dying. The treatment had consequently been commenced at the most acute stage of the disease. End footnote. Oxide of zinc exerts a most remarkable action in certain cases of functional derangement of the nervous system. I have administered it in epilepsy, chorea, cases of mild hysteria, paralysis, and lead palsy, exhaustion from excessive mental work, and chronic alcoholic intoxication. I succeeded in obtaining favorable results in certain cases of epilepsy and chorea. Indeed, I had been induced at first to consider this agent as a specific for the treatment of epilepsy, and under this impression had communicated it to the British Medical Journal for the 23rd of November, 1855, a report on the use of oxide of zinc in epilepsy. Since that time, however, having continued to prescribe the remedy for the treatment of this disorder, I am now obliged to admit that it seldom, if ever, cures the disease, although it is certainly often attended with beneficial effects. I have obtained similar results in chorea. Indeed, oxide of zinc is perhaps more effectual in epilepsy. Some cases of mild hysteria were rapidly cured under a treatment with oxide of zinc. In others it produced scarcely any effect, and in certain instances the medicine proved objectionable. In the following cases oxide of zinc acted most favorably. M.J., age 48, admitted on November 16, 1855. She suffered 2 years from an abscess in the forehead, and has complained ever since that time of constant headache. Is very subject to giddiness and fainting, but never had any fit. Muscae volentantes and tinnitus aurium, no bolus hysterectus. Sleeps very restlessly, appetite pretty good, has not menstruated for a year. On admission, 1 grain of oxide of zinc was ordered to be taken twice a day, which on the 30th had been gradually increased to 6 grains twice a day. On the 19th and 21st she had half an ounce of castor oil. On December 7th I took the following note: is now quite well and strong, no more headache or giddiness, sleeps better, though not yet quite soundly. Is dismissed. A.M. admitted on the 28th November 1855, complains of headache, muscae volentantes, and tinnitus aurium. For the last 6 weeks, appetite good, bowels rather confined. She was treated with oxide of zinc and dismissed cured on the 19th of December. I have not found paralysis and lead palsy to be relieved by the internal use of oxide of zinc. Mental exhaustion. Remarkably favorable results have been obtained from the prescription of oxide of zinc in cases of cerebral affection arising from excessive mental exertion. And this disease, which is in many cases difficult to cure, is rapidly brought under control by the above means. I have treated 4 cases of this description by means of oxide of zinc. The first is a lady, Mrs. B. I was requested to see her on the 21st November 1855. She has been for the last 3 months almost exclusively engaged in literary pursuits, and ascribed her illness to excessive reading and exertion of the mind. The patient was treated with 1 grain of oxide of zinc twice a day, and a blister was directed to be applied to the back of the neck. Castor oil was given once. On the 23rd of November I found her much better. On the 24th there was a slight relapse, but soon gave way under the same treatment. She expressed herself quite recovered on the 26th. I again visited her about a fortnight afterwards, and found her quite well. The next case is of considerable interest, as, after other means had failed, the patient recovered under a treatment with oxide of zinc. Mrs. E., age 15, had been for the last 3 years a pupil at a school, and has applied herself with excessive zeal to her studies. She suffers from headache and giddiness, occasional tinnitus aurium and muscae volentantes. Mental abstraction has become difficult. I advised her to give up her studies, and began the treatment with quinine and iron, but without benefit. 1 grain of oxide of zinc was then ordered to be taken twice a day, and a small blister directed to be applied to the back of the neck. The same part was again blistered a fortnight afterwards, so the dose of medicine was increased gradually until she took 3 grains twice a day. After taking 60 pills of oxide of zinc, she has completely recovered, nothing more than an occasional and but a slight headache being left, felt especially when confined in a room or a crowded carriage. In the following case, excessive mental exertion was also the exciting cause of the complaint, the individual being in other respects predisposed to it. Again, oxide of zinc proved most useful. J.R., age 19, admitted an outpatient of the Westminster Hospital on the 23rd of November, 1855. About 2 years previous to admission had a fit, subsequent to a fall on his head from a height of 4 feet. The accident occurred on an afternoon and the fit took place on the evening of the same day, lasting till the following day. He was quite insensible for nearly the whole of that time. Has had no return of the fit since then, is a numerical printer, and besides his business has been very busy studying Greek and Latin at night, which he believes to have been the main cause of his present illness. He dropped his literary pursuits a few days ago, but continues attending to his business. For the last 2 years he has been suffering from headache, pain in the region of the heart, and palpitation. He trembles at any sudden and unexpected disturbance, and occasionally feels a sensation of fainting. Was ordered to take 2 grains of oxide of zinc twice a day. On the 30th he was much better. The dose was increased to 5 grains. He returned to me for the last time on December 7th, being greatly improved in every respect. It may be here to remind the reader of the melancholy case of C.T., page 67. This patient recovered completely under treatment of oxide of zinc. Dyspepsia. The following case is interesting, as showing that in some cases of inveterate chronic gastralgia, oxide of zinc may affect or assist in effecting a perfect cure. I called on Mr. R. on the 1st of October, 1856. He was suffering from great pain in the epigastric region, occurring 3 times a day, about 2 hours after each meal. The pain was attended with sensation of great weakness and mental depression. He felt quite well in every other respect. I treated the case with quinine and sulfuric acid, rhubarb and sulfate of magnesia, iron and quinine, and compound soap pill. On the 22nd of November he was better, though still complaining. In January 1847 this gentleman again requested me to see him. He was suffering from the same symptoms as previously. On examining his urine on the 3rd of February, I found it to contain uric acid and urates, and I prescribed 10 minims of liquor potassium to be added to his beer at dinner. 1 grain of oxide of zinc, made into a pill with a confection of roses, was also ordered to be taken twice a day. On the 7th of February there was a decided improvement. On the 12th the improvement had continued. He was directed to take the liquor potassium twice a day, and the dose of oxide of zinc was increased to 2 grains. On March 7th he only felt a slight pain in the stomach every 2 or 3 days. He had been taking 4 grains of oxide of zinc for a dose, was directed to admit the liquor potassium and 5 grains of oxide of zinc twice a day. The following note was recorded on the 27th of March. Has had no return of pain for the last 8 or 10 days. Has taken no oxide of zinc for a week. I then discontinued attending, and since March 1857 there has been no return of dyspeptic symptoms. Footnote: Dr. Theophilus Thompson has found oxide of zinc very useful for the removal of collocative sweating in phthisis. Lancet, 1854, Volume 1, end footnote. I now propose returning to our subject and describing the action of oxide of zinc in cases of chronic alcoholic intoxication. Chronic alcoholism treated with oxide of zinc. Let it first be well understood that it is not advisable to give oxide of zinc indiscriminately in every case of disturbance of the nervous functions owing to intemperance. The beneficial results of this treatment are more especially observed in those cases of chronic alcoholism which are unattended by any organic disorder, and when the disease occurs in an individual of a sound constitution. The various affections of the lungs are peculiarly liable to diminish in a considerable degree the property of oxide of zinc of controlling the illness in question. Rheumatism may next be mentioned, but I must not omit to observe that chronic alcoholism is very frequently attended with a symptom resulting directly from the alcoholic poisoning, and which might be mistaken for rheumatism. It is described by the patient as a weakness and pain across the hips and want of power in the knees, preventing a heavy weight being carried, or even interfering with the act of walking. This symptom usually gives way under a treatment with oxide of zinc, but may sometimes remain after the patient has recovered in every other respect. In some cases it will eventually disappear by having recourse to tonics. Gastric disorders, which so frequently accompany chronic alcoholism, are sometimes rapidly subdued by oxide of zinc. This occurs, no doubt, principally in those cases where the gastric symptoms depend entirely on the disturbance of the functions of the nervous system. And that such a disorder does not actually exist is shown by the following observation of Dr. Budd, in his book on Diseases of the Stomach. Having mentioned the organic changes occurring in the stomach in cases of indigestion of drunkards, he states, page 287, but the gastric disorder we are considering may occur without either of these events, and when the stomach, in case of death, may exhibit no striking marks of the disease. When the gastric symptoms are very urgent, such as great pain in the stomach, with much vomiting, I am in the habit of prescribing opium at night, in the form of compound soap pills, independently of the oxide of zinc. In some of these cases, a substitution for a few days of carbonate of ammonia for oxide of zinc was attended with benefit. The following is the usual effect of oxide of zinc in simple cases of chronic alcoholism. First, the sleep is improved. The patient does not lie so long awake at night, and the nightmare becomes less frightful. Then the hallucinations decrease. The patient is no longer troubled with black specks passing constantly before his eyes, or with the sight of imaginary objects, such as insects or other animals crawling about the room, and extraordinary noises are no longer heard. The attacks of trembling also diminish in frequency, if not intensity, and gradually pass off. This improvement is attended with an increase of appetite as well as a marked diminution of the gastric symptoms, and when the patient can take food and digest it well, he may be looked upon as in a fair way towards recovery. Gradually, muscular power returns and the mental depression, which frequently accompanies chronic alcoholism, disappears. The patient becomes cheerful and happy, and expresses with gratitude his joy at feeling quite well. Footnote: it is to be understood that during the period of recovery the symptoms are frequently not relieved in the above-mentioned order. End footnote. When the disorder is complicated by an organic disease, I have found it advisable to begin with oxide of zinc, in order to alleviate as much as possible the functional derangement of the nervous system, and then to adopt such a course of treatment as may be considered most suitable to the occasion. The following cases have been selected as well adapted to illustrate the action of oxide of zinc in chronic alcoholism, and will be found worth the reader's attention. They are divided into two classes, the first class including those cases in which the disease assumed its simple form, and the second including those which were accompanied with other disorders. Each class of cases is also divided into two subdivisions, the first comprehending patients treated for chronic alcoholism at the time they were overindulging themselves in spirituous beverages, and the second those who came under treatment some time after having given up the habit of drinking. End of section 7.
Section 8 of On Chronic Alcoholic Intoxication, with an inquiry into the influence of the abuse of alcohol as a predisposing cause of disease, by William Marcet. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Class 1, Division 1. Cases of chronic alcoholism not complicated by other diseases, and occurring during the period of intemperance. W.B. Case 1, age 34. A carpenter admitted as outpatient at the Westminster Hospital on November 21, 1855. Has been addicted from his youth to the excessive use of alcoholic liquors, and is in the habit of taking 1 pint of gin daily, with 2 or 3 and occasionally 6 or 8 pints of beer. Has had a slight attack of delirium tremens, cannot sleep at night but feels composed if he has recourse to spirituous libations before going to bed. 10 days ago he drank more than usual, and now suffers from peculiar and very unpleasant sensation of choking, from giddiness, great weakness in the legs, and trembling of the body. Since the 10th of November, has reduced his allowance of alcoholic beverages to 4 pints of ale and 1 quartern of gin. On the 21st was ordered to take 2 grains of oxide of zinc in the form of a pill with confection of roses. On the 24th there was already a very great improvement, Had slept well the night before. No more trembling of the body, although the tongue remained slightly tremulous. Appetite better, and is himself surprised at his improved condition. Zinc oxide, 5 grains, taken twice daily. 27th. Has not slept so well since the 24th. Still complains of uneasiness in the throat and is very subject to flatulence. Zinc oxide, 8 grains, taken twice daily. December 1st. The occurrence of unfavorable symptoms has discontinued, and he feels much better. The sensation of choking is not nearly so strong. Zinc oxide, 10 grains, taken twice daily. 8th. Improvement continued, sleeps well, appetite good, takes 1 pint of beer and a half quartern of gin daily. Zinc oxide, 12 grains, taken twice daily. From the 26th of December, the oxide of zinc was given under the form of powders instead of pills. He continued taking the same medicament until the 12th of January 1856. On the 18th December, 14 grains had been prescribed to be taken twice a day, and a small blister ordered to be applied over the larynx, with the view of relieving the sensation of spasmodic dyspnea. This was attended with some slight benefit. On the 5th of January, the dose of oxide of zinc was increased to 15 grains twice a day, and another blister was applied to the larynx. On the 12th, he is reported as still suffering from uneasiness at the glottis, although otherwise quite well. He was then ordered to give up the oxide of zinc and take a mixture containing rhubarb, etc. On the 19th, having observed that he used to swallow a large quantity of air, I advised him to give up that habit, and on the 26th the spasmodic dyspnea had greatly diminished. On the 30th is nearly free from this last symptom, sleeps quite well at night and enjoys a good appetite, takes 3 pints of beer a day and no spirits. Dismissed cured. This unfortunate man returned to me on the 21st of January, 1857, having again taken to drinking, and that shortly after he had left off attending the Westminster Hospital. He had also again contracted a habit of swallowing air, and suffered much from spasmodic dyspnea. He had been drinking from 3 to 4 pints of porter with an occasional glass of gin, and gradually this was increased to from 4 to 5 quarts of porter daily and a quartern of gin. Has had no attack of delirium tremens, but suffers at times from great giddiness. He awakens very often at night with difficulty of breathing. Is in very low spirits, appetite good, no hallucinations. Has been under medical treatment at Lewisham, but without obtaining any relief. To take 2 grains of oxide of zinc twice a day, and he was reminded of the importance of his giving up the habit of drinking. 24. Sleeps better at night, is in better spirits, has diminished his allowance to 2 pints of porter daily. Zinc oxide, 3 grains, taken twice daily. 28th. Improvement continues, drinks 3 pots of beer daily and a quartern of gin, endeavors to swallow less air, dyspnea much diminished, does not suffer from flatulence so much as before. Zinc oxide, 5 grains, taken twice daily. February 4th. He now sleeps very well at night and is on the whole much better. Zinc oxide, 8 grains, taken twice daily. 14th. On the 4th he indulged himself a little in his old and inveterate habit of drinking, and the following night suffered from sleeplessness and a return of dyspnea. Zinc oxide, 7 grains, pill Sapiens Co., 3 grains, to procure sleep daily. 25th. Is again better, to continue the powders. March 6th. From the 28th has returned to the habit of drinking. Great giddiness, no sleep at night, loss of appetite, and much mental depression. My notes of this case end here. W.B. may have attended the hospital some little time longer, without deriving any permanent benefit from the treatment, as he never gave up, and, in all probability, never will give up, the habit of drinking. T.S. Case 3, age 33, an engineer on board a steamboat, admitted as an outpatient on the 2nd of April, 1856. Is in the habit of taking about 1 pint of spirits and 4 or 5 pints of beer daily, and has suffered from several attacks of delirium tremens, the last occurring about 4 months ago. He complains at present of want of sleep, giddiness, and much nervous uneasiness. Tongue slightly tremulous, much pain in the epigastric region, feels in the throat a peculiar sensation as of choking, especially in the morning, which he is in the habit of relieving by having recourse to drink. Also complains of great weakness. Zinc oxide, 2 grains, taken twice daily. April 4th, slept very well last night. Feels less uncomfortable. The sensation of choking has completely disappeared.
has reduced his allowance first to 2 pints of ale and 2 glasses of gin, and then to 2 pints of ale without gin. Zinc oxide, 4 grains, taken twice daily. 12th, no return of uneasiness, sleeps now quite well, and does not suffer from spasmodic dyspnea, but feels rather weak. He says he has taken a great deal of medicine, but felt no relief until I prescribed for him the powders of oxide of zinc. Has returned to work and drinks about 2 pots of beer and 2 or 3 glasses of gin daily. Dismissed cured. GP, case 4, age 35, admitted as an outpatient on 17th of May, 1858. Has been addicted for a considerable time to the excessive use of alcoholic liquors. 6 years ago he went to America, spent there 2 years in the army, during which time he drank a great deal of brandy and water. Has been in the constant habit for many years of drinking about 8 pints of beer daily, and also occasionally pure brandy. Had 2 attacks of delirium tremens within the last 2 years. On each occasion, the attack lasted 3 or 4 days. On the 12th of May, according to his own expression, had a little too much to drink, and felt unwell the next morning. Since then he suffers from paroxysms of great trembling, cannot sleep at night, which is, however, a symptom of long standing, and is subject to dizziness of sight, although not to headache. On the 15th, as he was walking in the street, he fancied there were ropes dangling about him. Complains of slight spasmodic dyspnea, appetite bad, occasional pain in the region of the bladder. Zinc oxide, 2 grains, taken twice daily. To take 2 pints of beer daily, and no more. 24th, feels and looks better. Trembling now very slight. Sleeps very well at night. Began sleeping well the first night after taking the powders. No hallucinations, no more dyspnea. Still feels weak. Has taken the powders regularly and adheres to 2 pints of ale daily. Zinc oxide, 4 grains, taken twice daily. 27th, improvement continued, no more trembling, sleeps well at night, appetite pretty good. No more pain in the region of the bladder, slight constipation, continues taking 2 pints of beer daily, left off attending. EB, case 6, age 40, a sailor, admitted as outpatient on the 10th of June, 1858. 10 or 11 years ago, this patient contracted the habit of drinking spirits to the extent of about 12 glasses a day, which he continued doing for 18 months. During that period he was occasionally intoxicated, but used to get over it so well as to be able to resume his work and to drink again the following morning. He admits having suffered from an attack of delirium tremens in 1843, although not then in the habit of drinking to excess, and had indulged himself on that occasion to a considerable extent in alcoholic liquors for 4 or 5 days. 18 months ago he reduced his allowance of rum from 4 to 2 glasses a day, taking beer occasionally to the extent of 5 or 6 pints when he could go ashore. Is subject to pain in the loins and sometimes in the stomach. Tongue usually pretty clean. Suffers now and then from headache, giddiness, and tinnitus aurium. Often sees a shadow passing before his eyes and then rapidly disappearing. Is restless at night and cannot sleep well. When about 22 years old, had 4 series of fits, probably epileptic, but from the age of about 22 had no return of those attacks. Sometimes his legs tremble. They are very weak, especially the right one. In February last applied for medical advice and obtained relief, although he never recovered the free use of his right leg, and the left remained weak. Zinc oxide, 2 grains, taken twice daily. 14th, is stronger, but complains of the powders occasioning sickness. Feels very sleepy in the daytime, sleeps well at night. 17th, improvement continues. Zinc oxide, 2 grains, taken twice daily. 24th, to continue the powders. 28th, sleeps very well at night, no longer any trembling or headache. Right leg not yet regained its whole strength. Drinks now daily 2 pints of porter and takes a glass of gin occasionally.
Powder pulverized.
July 8th, the powders make him very sick, and he has vomited after breakfast. Zinc oxide, 3 grains, taken twice daily. 19th, complains of weakness in the right knee, the leg occasionally giving way. In other respects is perfectly well. Advised him to take some sea bathing, or at all events bathe in cold water, and give up every other medical treatment. J.P., case 8, age 39, a coal porter, admitted as outpatient on the 11th of October. For the last 22 years has been accustomed to drink 5 pints of beer and a glass of gin daily. He is moreover intoxicated once a week. On Saturday night has been in bad health for the last 15 months. On sitting his legs tremble, but they remain quiet when he stands. Sleep very restless, is incessantly turning over at night, complains of giddiness and shooting pains across the temples, and occasionally a fog or cloud passes before his eyes. No tinnitus aurium, is frequently sick when getting up in the morning, very weak in the knees, and suffers from an acute pain in the right hip. I directed him to take 1 pint of ale daily. From the date of admission till the 28th of October, this patient was not treated with oxide of zinc, and obtained no relief. On the 28th of October, I prescribed for him 2 grains of oxide of zinc to be taken twice a day. November 4th, great relief since he began the powders. Sleeps pretty well at night, no longer any nightmare. Not so much trembling on the legs or sickness in the morning. Feels a little stronger, but still complains of weakness, especially in the right hip. Passing shadows no longer perceived. Zinc oxide, 4 grains taken twice daily. 11th, complains of a slight cough, knees and hips still weak, in other respects quite well. His legs to be rubbed with turpentine liniment, and take the mixture of iron and quinine. On the 22nd he returned to work, but on the 29th, the weakness continuing, I directed him to resume the oxide of zinc, 4 grains twice a day, and omit the mixture. On the 6th of December feels much stronger, and now goes to work regularly. On the 16th, as he did not sleep quite so well, 3 grains of compound soap pill were prescribed to be taken every night. On the 23rd he gave up attending the hospital, having quite recovered. J.W., case 11, age 18. Admitted as an outpatient on the 28th of October, 1858, a hawker. Has been for 5 years of intemperate habits, although he has considerably reduced his allowance of drink for the last 3 weeks. When in the company of friends, that is, from once to 3 times a week, takes occasionally as much as 8 pints of beer and 1 or 2 glasses of gin. On the 7th instant he drank about 15 pints of beer and 5 or 6 glasses of spirit. The next day he was seized with great nausea, giddiness, and trembling all over the body. Besides these symptoms, he also suffers from a pain in the left hip, and great weakness in the legs. Does not sleep well at night. To take 1 pint of beer daily, no spirits, and 2 grains of oxide of zinc twice a day. November 9th, the powders have made him sleep in the daytime. He does not, however, sleep soundly at night. The pain has shifted to the right hip. No longer any giddiness, but trembles very much in the morning, although only for about 5 minutes. He is very weak and thinks he could not carry 1/4 of a hundredweight. Zinc oxide, 4 grains, taken twice daily. 11th,
Powder pulverized.
the hips to be rubbed with compound soap liniment. 18th, no longer any trembling whatever. He would feel quite well, were it not for the weakness of the hips. To take a mixture of iron and quinine. 22nd, no improvement for the last medicine. To resume oxide of zinc, 4 grains taken twice daily. 23rd, returned to work pushing a heavy wheelbarrow yesterday evening for about 2 hours. Felt no inconvenience from it except stiffness. 25th, is still stronger,
Pushing his wheelbarrow for 3 hours.
zinc oxide, 4 grains twice daily.
December 6th, has not attended since the 25th last month. Can now work as he used to do before he fell ill. Pain in the hips very slight, and felt only occasionally. Discharged cured. End of section 8. Section 9 of On Chronic Alcoholic Intoxication, with an Inquiry into the Influence of the Abuse of Alcohol as a Predisposing Cause of Disease, by William Marcet. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Class 1, Division 2. Cases of chronic alcoholism not complicated by other symptoms, and occurring in patients having resumed habits of sobriety. GR Case 18, age 38, a general dealer, admitted December 20th, 1858. Has been addicted to the habit of drinking from youth till 11 months ago, taking from 3 glasses to a pint of spirits daily, and has had as much as nearly 2 pints of spirits in one day. His daily allowance of ale has been 4 or 5 pints. Never suffered from delirium tremens or any other disease, but gave up drinking completely 11 months ago, because he found it did not agree with his health. The symptoms he is now suffering from have lasted since then. These are great giddiness and headache, passing clouds and sudden blindness for 2 or 3 minutes, but no actual hallucinations. Cannot sleep at all at night. Trembles a little all day long, especially when moving about. Appetite very bad, no pain in the stomach, has an eczematous eruption on the face,
Has done no work since the 17th. On the 23rd December he was ordered to take 2 grains of oxide of zinc twice a day. He had so far improved on the 27th as to feel capable of returning to work. He suffered no longer from giddiness and headache, and the appetite was returning. He was now beginning to enjoy his breakfast, which he had not done for the last 9 months, and he slept a great deal better at night. R. Zinc oxide, 4 grains taken twice daily, and apply the following lotion to the face. Boracis SC.J. aqueous, 8 ounces. On the 3rd of January he felt quite well. I then ordered for him a mixture of liquor, arsenicalis, and carbonate of potash, and he called again for the last time on the 10th of January, when the eruption had nearly disappeared. W. H., Case 7, age 58, an emery sifter, admitted on the 9th of August, 1858. Upwards of 20 years ago he contracted the habit of drinking to excess. His favorite beverage consisted of gin, which he gradually increased to 4 glasses a day, and he took from 1 to 3 pints of beer daily. He admits that this habit has lasted during 15 years, but for the last 5 or 6 years he has reduced his allowance to an average of 2 pints of beer daily and no spirits. When 18 years old had syphilis, and about 20 years ago was attacked with fits, apparently epileptic, but which have not returned since that time. His present illness began 6 years ago. He complains of much giddiness, with trembling, sleeps a little at night, is then very restless. Frequently fancies he sees cats and rats, has thoughts there were rats on his bed. States also that on several occasions during the last 6 years he has rambled a great deal in his mind, and according to his own impression, people about him have thought he was going mad. Also muscae volitantes and an occasional sensation of choking. Had delirium tremens 2 years ago, and after an accidental indulgence, although he had then given up the habit of drinking to excess. He was first treated with a decoction of aloes and the hospital mixture of iron and quassi, from which, however, he derived no benefit. On the 11th of October, 2 grains of oxide of zinc were prescribed for him, to be taken twice a day, and on the 14th the dose was increased to 4 grains. 18th, since the 14th he feels himself better. Sleep much improved, not so giddy, headache and muscae volitantes diminished, sensation of choking less urgent. Zinc oxide, 6 grains taken twice daily. 21st, has slept well for the last 2 or 3 nights, giddiness and headache considerably less. Has noticed that he feels sleepy in the day, and if he sits down to read, he falls asleep. He was never subject to sleep in the daytime until he took oxide of zinc. His own words are, "I got no sleep, or very little, night or day, before beginning the powders. He becomes sleepy about an hour after taking the medicine. Complains of sickness at night when he awakes. Appetite somewhat improved. Has completely given up every kind of alcoholic liquor, and drinks nothing now but tea and water. I advise him to take half a pint of beer daily. Powder pulverized, 6 grains, taken twice daily. 24th, improvement continues. Powder pulverized, 6 grains, taken twice daily. 29th, improvement remarkable. No longer any uneasy sensation in the throat. Very seldom suffers from muscae volitantes, feels stronger, although still weak. Powder pulverized, 6 grains, taken twice daily. November 1st, feels quite well, although still weak. The oxide of zinc was now discontinued, and I prescribed for him the hospital mixture of iron and quinine. 8th, feels stronger, allows himself 1 or 2 pints of ale daily. Patient now left off attending, but on November 30th I called upon him, and I found that he had been gradually recovering his strength, that he slept tolerably well, although not so soundly as when under treatment, and considered himself perfectly recovered from his long illness. He took very little beer, say less than 1 pint daily. Felt quite capable of working if he had any work to do. J.L., case 29, age 24, a butcher, admitted on the 21st of January, 1859. Has been in the habit, during 8 or 10 years, of drinking port wine to the extent of a bottle a day, with a daily allowance of a half pint of spirits, but has seldom been intoxicated. For the last 5 or 6 years he has diminished his allowance of stimulants, and during the preceding 12 months has drunk no more than about 1 pint of beer daily. The first symptoms of his present illness showed themselves 18 months ago. He suffers from headache, want of sleep, slight trembling in the morning, and perceives at times passing shadows. He is very weak, especially in the hips, and complains of pain in the knees. to take 2 grains of oxide of zinc twice a day. On the 27th, there was already an improvement in his health and the dose was doubled. On the 31st, I took the following note: sleeps nearly all night and is much less troubled with nightmare, no longer any passing shadows, appetite improved. Pain in the knees and weakness in the hips about the same. Has a refreshing sleep of about an hour in the afternoon, feels sick after taking the powders. To rub the knees with turpentine liniment and to continue taking 4 grains of oxide of zinc twice a day. On February 10th, as he stated, he had suffered much from headache and giddiness during the preceding week. The dose of oxide of zinc was reduced 2 grains. Footnote: this was one of those remarkable cases in which 2 large doses of oxide of zinc have brought on symptoms resembling those arising from the disease itself. By diminishing the dose, these unfavorable symptoms disappeared. End footnote. Which he continued taking until he left off attending. The 24th of February reported the following note of his case: sleeps very well, appetite very good, is now only subject to a little trembling when taking active exercise, and is then obliged to sit down, is improving in strength, knees still painful. He states he has suffered for the last 18 months from his present illness, has consulted 4 medical men, and obtained no relief until he underwent a treatment with oxide of zinc. On that day, a small blister was ordered to be applied to the knee. March 7th, strong exercise no longer brings on trembling, is free from every symptom of chronic alcoholism, and only experiences pain in the knee, is directed to return a fortnight afterwards. He called on the 4th of April and announced himself quite well, only feeling occasionally somewhat faint when actively at work. W.J., Case 5, age 75, a shoemaker, admitted as outpatient on June 7, 1858. When a young man, he became addicted to hard drinking, which he continued indulging in for about 12 years, when, after a sharp attack of delirium tremens, he adopted habits of sobriety, taking no more than about 1 pint of porter daily, with an occasional glass of spirit. About 6 weeks previous to admission, he became subject to trembling. Since then complains also of headache, occasional giddiness, and slight hallucinations. Lies awake for 3 or 4 hours every night, but sleeps very well the remainder of the night. His appetite is bad, feels weak, and has been obliged to give up work. To take 2 grains of oxide of zinc twice a day. By the 14th of June, the dose of oxide of zinc had been gradually increased to 4 grains. On the 21st is a great deal better, although still weak. Sleep improved, headache diminished, complains of sensation of nausea occurring about an hour after taking the powders, and feels very sleepy at that time. Footnote: a blister had been applied previously to the back of the neck, but the date of this prescription was not recorded in my notebook. End footnote. 5 grains of oxide of zinc were prescribed to be taken twice a day. He returned on the 28th, on which day I took the following note: no longer any trembling. Sleeps now very well at night. Powders do not produce any sickness. To continue with 5 grains of oxide of zinc. On the 1st of July he was quite well in every respect, though still weak. He was ordered to take a mixture of iron and quinine. He called for the last time on the 5th of July. End of section 9. Section number 10 of On Chronic Alcoholic Intoxication, with an inquiry into the influence of the abuse of alcohol as a predisposing cause of disease by William Marset. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Class 2, Division 1, Cases of Chronic Alcoholism, accompanied by other symptoms and occurring during the period of excessive indulgence. E.B. Case 9, age 41, a tailor, admitted on the 18th of October, 1858. Has been addicted to hard drinking for the last 20 years, and takes an average of 4 or 5 pints of porter and 2 or 3 glasses of gin daily, but has drunk repeatedly as much as a gallon of beer in the day. Has been intoxicated occasionally, though not severely. Has suffered from ill health for 12 or 13 years. For the last 8 years his appetite has been very deficient, and feels a constant pain in the stomach, which is increased after meals, and is attended with sickness, especially in the morning. Has had a bad cough for the past 3 months. Complains of shortness of breath, and has suffered from acute pain in the region of the kidneys, which, however, he feels now much less than formerly. Sleep very restless and disturbed by dreadful dreams. Occasional headache and constant giddiness, muscae volitantes, and now and then dimness of sight. Occasional hallucinations, especially at night when falling asleep, and is subject to trembling. On the 25th of October, having derived little or no benefit from the treatment adopted, I prescribed for him 2 grains of oxide of zinc to be taken twice a day. This dose was increased to 6 grains on the 29th. He gave up attending from the 1st of November, and on that day I took the following note of his state. Is now very much troubled by his cough, though he sleeps more comfortably at night. Sickness diminished, still trembles a little, but less than before. Pain in stomach not so acute. This patient applied again for advice on the 6th January, 1859. Having drunk 3 pints of porter and a glass of spirits daily since he left the hospital. He was again suffering from symptoms of chronic alcoholism, and was treated as before with oxide of zinc. On the 20th slept well, no more trembling, occasional headache, bad appetite. On the 27th the appetite was improving, he no longer suffered from giddiness, and the headache was but trifling. He then gave up attending the hospital. WB Case 10, age 56, a laborer, admitted on the 2nd of October 1858. He first contracted a habit of drinking when in France, 26 or 30 years ago. Some years later he returned to this country and worked in the fields as a laborer for 9 years, during which time he lived a sober life. He afterwards resided at Peckham and drove a coal van, when he drank from 3 to 6 pints of beer daily, and occasionally a little rum. This he continued doing for 2 years. During the following 9 years he was still employed driving a coal van, although living in another part of town, and allowed himself the same quantity of beer and spirits. For the next 3 years he was employed at a wharf, but was engaged more especially in driving a cart. He then diminished his allowance of stimulants to 2 pints of beer and no spirits. Being employed afterwards at some gas works, he took for 2 years and a half about 3 pints of beer daily. During the last 2 years and a half he has been at work in a brewery, and in the habit of drinking 6 or 7 pints of beer a day, taking but little solid food, being sometimes a whole day without eating anything. He has not often been drunk, and has never had delirium tremens. Within the last year has been very subject to giddiness. When reading he sometimes loses his sight entirely for 5 minutes. He also frequently sees objects double and is troubled with muscae volitantes. His wife says he has frequently stated during his illness that he saw rats on his bed. Hears a sound of bells ringing, especially in the right ear. A fortnight before applying for relief, this patient was seized with a pain in the right lumbar region, which has continued since then, being at times very acute, especially when he is in bed. Has passed blood in his stools several times. About the 11th of October was suffering from this symptom, although to no severe extent. Complains of pain in the stomach, sometimes very great after meals. Feels very weak, especially in the left leg. Has a cough. WB was first treated for bronchitis and rheumatism, but as he did not improve, I was induced to look still more closely into his case, and then found him to be suffering principally from the effects of long-continued intemperance. On the 28th was ordered to take 2 grains of oxide of zinc twice a day. The dose was increased to 4 grains on the 1st of November, and on the 4th to 8 grains. The following notes were taken on the 8th. Trembling much diminished, no longer any hallucinations or muscae volitantes or noises in the ears. Still complains of want of sleep. 8 grains pulverized, taken twice daily. On the 11th, 10 grains of oxide of zinc were ordered for a dose, and, as he was complaining of his cough, I prescribed our hospital pectoral mixture. A few days after, date omitted, I was now disturbed at night by cough, but no longer from any uneasy sensation and restlessness, as formerly. Has perfectly recovered from the trembling. Appetite is excellent, takes 2 pints of ale daily, and is in very good spirits. Is cured of chronic alcoholism. J.H., case 25, age 27, a shoemaker. Admitted on December 9th, 1858. 18 months ago contracted the habit of drinking to excess, taking 4 to 5 pints of beer and a glass of spirits daily. But during the last 12 months, drinks 3 pints of beer daily and spirits occasionally. Complains of cough and of pain in the stomach, especially after eating. Is in very low spirits and fancies at times that people are wishing to do him some injury. Trembles a great deal, more especially in the evening. Cannot sleep at night, is troubled with ringing in the ears, and black specks flying before his eyes. Much weakness in the knees. Has been frequently drunk, but never had delirium tremens. He began suffering from the foregoing symptoms shortly after taking to hard drinking. The patient was treated at first for bronchitis with cod liver oil and a mixture of iron and quinine, from which treatment he derived little or no benefit. I then discovered he was suffering from the effects of chronic alcoholic stimulants, and prescribed for him on January 6 2 grains of oxide of zinc to be taken twice a day. On the 10th of January there was already a marked improvement. The dose was increased to 4 grains. The following note was recorded on the 13th. No trembling, sleeps well, giddiness very slight, complaints of cough, especially in the morning, feels much stronger, drinks now very little. I prescribed half an ounce of cod liver to be taken 3 times a day, and 5 grains of oxide of zinc to be taken twice a day. On January 17th, the dose of oxide of zinc was reduced to 3 grains, continued with the cod liver oil, till the 24th of January, when he called at a hospital for the last time. On that day the cough had rather increased, and he occasionally observed muscular twitchings in the fingers and legs. Nothing of the other symptoms remains, but a slight nervous uneasiness and a shooting pain over the right eyebrow. End of section 10. Section number 11 on chronic alcoholic intoxication, with an inquiry into the influence of the abuse of alcohol as a predisposing cause of disease by William Martian. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Class 2, Division 2. Cases of chronic alcoholism complicated by other symptoms, and occurring after the habit of excessive drinking had been given up. J.R., Case 23, age 34, a policeman, admitted on the 17th of December, 1858. During a period of 2 years, he drank an average of 1 gallon of beer and 3 glasses of spirits daily, but for the last 10 years has given up habits of intemperance, taking 1 or 1.5 pints of beer daily, and scarcely any spirits. He has been subject to coughing for several years past, complains of pain in the stomach when fasting, appetite pretty good, trembles a great deal in the morning, does not sleep well, and dreams a great deal, slight hallucinations at night, or when he shuts his eyes, weakness in legs excessive. Has never been quite well for the last 10 years, but only gave up work on the 2nd of November. The patient was first treated with cod liver oil and quinine, from which he derived no benefit. On January 3rd, I prescribed for him 2 grains of oxide of zinc to be taken twice a day. On the 6th, the dose was increased to 4 grains, and on the 10th to 6 grains. Was then better. Trembling diminished, sleep improved, in better spirits, stronger, no longer any hallucinations. He claimed a pain in the region of the right kidney and was directed to rub this part with compound soap liniment. On the 17th of January, the dose of oxide of zinc was reduced to 4 grains. He applied for the last time on January 20th. The pains in the loins and stomach had somewhat diminished. Felt quite well in other respects. D.B. Case 27, age 72, a greengrocer, admitted on the 17th of January, 1859. This patient, it may be remembered, was suffering from symptoms of chronic alcoholism complicated by an attack of gout. He had from youth taken to the habit of drinking and has been subject to gout from the age of 16. The symptoms of chronic alcoholism diminish or almost entirely leave him during the intervals between the attacks of gout and increase on the return of this illness. On the day of his admission, I prescribed for him 2 grains of oxide of zinc to be taken twice a day, which dose was increased to 3 grains, on the 20th, when the nervous symptoms had already subsided. On the 24th, I prescribed in addition to 5 grains of oxide of zinc a mixture of carbonate of potash and rhubarb. On the 27th, the powders were omitted, and M.X. of colchicum wine were added to the mixture, which was continued. On the 31st was directed to rub the painful parts with compound soap liniment, and take 3 grains of compound soap pill every night. On the 3rd of February, the attack of gout was decidedly abating, and the patient had altogether improved much beyond his anticipations. The same treatment was continued, and on the 14th of February, the dose of compound soap pill was increased to 5 grains. The 24th of February, the attack of gout had passed off. I ordered half an ounce of cod liver oil to be taken 3 times a day, and 2 grains of oxide of zinc twice a day. On March 3rd, another attack of gout was impending, there being a return of pain under the feet and swelling in the left thumb, but no relapse of the nervous symptoms occurred. I had again recourse to the mixture of carbonate of potash and rhubarb, to which M.X. of colchicum wine was subsequently added, and omitted the oxide of zinc. The attack of gout ran a mild course, and without any recurrence of the affection of the nervous system. On the 14th, the attack of gout was mitigated. On the 24th, it had passed off, leaving the thumb of the left hand slightly swollen, and the great toe disposed to swell towards the evening, and occasionally painful at night. The patient was then discharged, apparently cured of the affection of the nervous system, though still predisposed to gout. End of section 11.
Section 12 of On Chronic Alcoholic Intoxication, with an inquiry into the influence of the abuse of alcohol as a predisposing cause of disease, by William Martian. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Observations on Synoptical Table. Having glanced at the Synoptical Table, readers note the Synoptical Table giving an account of 48 cases of chronic alcoholism, treated by the author at the Westminster Hospital. The table is 11 columns across, the first column being the number of the patient, second column is name and age of the patient and their employment, third column quality and quantity of spirituous beverage taken, fourth column period of existence of intemperance, fifth column state of sleep, sixth column hallucinations, seventh column trembling, eighth column other symptoms referable to the nervous system, ninth column symptoms not referable to the nervous system, 10th column pre-existing disease, and 11th column result of treatment. End of reader's note. The reader will probably ask whether these cases include all the patients suffering from chronic alcoholism who have been placed under my care at the Westminster Hospital. The answer to this inquiry is that with the exception of 1 or 2 patients, not reported because the notes of their illness were not deemed sufficiently complete, the synoptical table is to be considered as offering a faithful account of the whole of the cases of chronic alcoholism that have come under observation in my hospital practice before the publication of my first edition, and from a short time after my being appointed to the Westminster Hospital. I must, however, remark that the number of cases described falls short to a considerable extent of the real number of hospital patients suffering from chronic alcoholism who have applied to me for medical advice. As, previous to my attention being called to the disease in question, I must have frequently overlooked the influence of spirituous liquors on the nervous system, an omission partly owing to the circumstances alluded to in the beginning of this work, and partly to the fact that, in many instances, the prominent symptoms depended on morbid conditions which differed widely from those known to be caused by the abuse of alcoholic beverages. I have not so much to add in connection with the quantity and quality of the spirituous beverages taken. The reader must recollect that the information contained under this head must be taken with reserve. Some patients stated that they had been intoxicated regularly every day, others only once a week. Others drank to a sufficient extent to bring on an attack of chronic alcoholism, although they only indulged to excess at irregular intervals. Thus it will be perceived there is much difficulty in placing in a tabular form the amount and nature of alcoholic beverage taken by each individual. The period during which habits of intemperance existed was equally difficult to ascertain with satisfactory correctness, for it often occurred that the allowance of beer and spirits had been gradually increased, and it was impossible to arrive exactly at the date when the quantity taken had been sufficient to interfere with health. It also frequently happened that an individual, having drunk freely for a certain number of years, suddenly reduced his allowance within moderate limits, and then again took to intemperate habits. This could not well be expressed in a synoptical table. Of the 4 to 5 cases where the condition of sleep was recorded, in 1 only had this function not been affected. In the present instance, case 48, I am disposed to believe that the individual suffered as much, if not more, from smoking as from drinking. Sleep, disturbed by excesses in spirituous beverages, has this peculiarity, that it is always attended with restlessness and mental anxiety. I do not remember hearing a patient suffering from chronic alcoholism state that he lay in bed comfortably, although he could not sleep. This symptom varied considerably in degree. In many cases, individuals were but slightly affected, frequently awaking from sleep disturbed by nightmare. Other patients more seriously attacked, not sleeping at all, and troubled at night with frightful hallucinations. Respecting the other symptoms of chronic alcoholism, I have merely to call the reader's attention to the fact that hallucination, trembling, and giddiness are, with but few exceptions, constantly present, and these symptoms, when occurring in conjunction with sleeplessness, appear to me all but characteristic of chronic alcoholism. The column headed "Symptoms not referable to the nervous system" show how frequently chronic alcoholism is attended with other diseases.
more especially affections of the digestive organs, these secondary disorders being frequently, in my opinion, the immediate cause of the attack of chronic alcoholism. The next column, headed Pre-existing Disease, indicates that the disease is very frequently preceded by one or more attacks of delirium tremens, and also that the patient may have suffered previously from chronic alcoholic intoxication. Finally, with respect to the treatment, it must be remembered that nothing is so difficult as to keep up a regular series of observations on hospital outpatients, for some apply only once for relief, others give up attending as soon as they feel themselves well enough to return to work, and a few only can be made to understand the importance of calling regularly at the hospital until they are discharged. The results obtained from the treatment of 48 cases of chronic alcoholism entered in the table may be expressed as follows: number of patients cured or who ceased attending having quite recovered, 25. Number of patients who gave up attending much relieved, 15. Number of cases where the action of oxide of zinc could not be ascertained, 8. On the administration of oxide of zinc dissolved in water by means of carbonic acid. After administering for several years oxide of zinc under the form of powder, it appeared to me that it would be an advantage to give the substance in a more soluble form, and I accordingly commenced an inquiry into the action of oxide of zinc dissolved in water by means of carbonic acid. I first undertook, in conjunction with Mr. F. Dupree, Ph.D., to determine the exact solubility of oxide of zinc in water by carbonic acid under the atmospheric pressure, and we found that 1 ounce of water dissolved by this means half a grain of oxide of zinc. Under the form of bicarbonate, 1 ounce of the solution contained 0.517 grains of oxide of zinc. Footnote: 10 cubic centimeters of the solution contained exactly 1.013 grams of oxide of zinc. End footnote. Mr. Squire of Duke Street, Grosvenor Square, was so kind as to prepare for me some of the fluid in the effervescent condition by acting on oxide or carbonate of zinc with carbonic acid under pressure. The solution was preserved in well-topped half-pint soda water bottles. Although oxide of zinc is transformed into bicarbonate of zinc when suspended in water and subjected to a stream of carbonic acid gas, still it should be understood that this bicarbonate, when taken in the stomach, must be decomposed by the acid gastric secretion, and consequently the zinc is absorbed into the blood in the same state of combination as if exhibited under the form of solid oxide. Independently of giving oxide of zinc in a dissolved condition, I had further objects in view. First, to administer oxide of zinc under a form which allows the gastric juice to act more readily on it than it would on a precipitated and burnt powder. Second, to be able to give oxide of zinc to patients without troubling them to take medicine. Most drinkers like soda water, for which the solution may be substituted, even without the patient being aware of it. If 1 bottle a day, a common half-pint soda water bottle, is to be taken, it should contain about 1 grain of oxide of zinc and be divided into 2 or 3 doses. If the patient is in the habit of drinking a large quantity of soda water, as 3 or 4 bottles a day, which sometimes happens in the case of inveterate drinkers in easy circumstances, then each bottle should contain at first about 1/4 of a grain of oxide of zinc. The strength of the solution to be gradually increased. At all events, a half-pint bottle should not contain more than 3 grains of oxide of zinc. This fluid will be readily mistaken for soda water, with a very slight metallic aftertaste. It produces precisely the same action on the body as a solid powdered oxide, and is equally, if not more, useful for the treatment of chronic alcoholism. It should be remembered, however, that the dose of oxide of zinc under the present form must be smaller than when given as a solid powder, for its action in the dissolved state is much more rapid than in the solid condition. On this account I prefer administering a weak solution 3 or 4 times a day to a strong solution only once or twice daily. I have treated 16 patients with the above solution of oxide of zinc. 8 of them were suffering from chronic alcoholism, and the 8 others from affections unconnected with the abuse of alcohol, as epilepsy, chorea, hysteria, etc. In the first 8 cases of chronic alcoholism, the results of the treatment were very satisfactory, some patients recovering entirely and others in a great measure. In the second series of cases, the action of the medicine was not near so favorable, as in no less than 4 of them no obvious benefit ensued. I endeavored in this treatise to bring prominently to light the most frequent form of disease produced by excessive drinking, and although it has been considered advisable to confine the subject strictly within the medical limits, it will be a source of satisfaction to me should any of my observations tend to strengthen the hands of those philanthropists who have devoted their time and exertions to the repression of excesses in alcoholic stimulants. End of section 12.